So while everyone's grabbing a bite of lunch, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce a couple of keynote speakers that we have with IBM. We've got Alison Butterill and Dan Sundt, and hopefully I pronounced their names correctly, and if I didn't, I'm sorry about that. So we're going to turn it over to Alison and Dan, and they're going to give us our keynote address.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so in a second here, I'll get my slide.
Very good, Dan.
Did you want to say something first, Alison, to kind of?
Yeah, thank you. So thank you very much for inviting us to participate with you. Dan and I are the offering managers or program managers for the Ibm I product. We work extremely closely with our development team, along with many of our marketing sales teams, to really understand what needs to be put into the Ibm I product. Dan is going to start off, and he'll cover, as it says, the Power Update with some things that we've just been introducing in the Power Marketplace. And then I'll follow that up with some application development Ibm I content as well. So with that, Dan, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. So everybody, so again, my name is Dan Sundt. So Alison and I work closely together. I'm going to, like she said, I'm going to try and kind of position some of the power to Ibm I. I'm not trying to get in the weeds on the power servers, but I think it's important to understand, Ibm I, the operating system runs on power. So that will be my start of the presentation here. So I like to start my sessions with this overview to kind of give a picture if you haven't followed our story lately, or you haven't, maybe quite appreciated that, the power business, the power hardware platform, for many years now, we've been a unified hardware platform for our Unix, our AIX operating system, Ibm I operating system, and we've been, doing more and more with enterprise Linux to make sure that our platform can fit and is relevant, for multiple operating systems. And these operating systems aren't instead of each other. They are definitely working well with each other. So for our Ibm I install base, we're not talking about Linux instead of, we're definitely talking about, where are there opportunities to maybe leverage something that runs in Linux right next to Ibm I to extend that value proposition. So hopefully you see through our session here that IBM's still investing in Ibm I. We're doing lots of great things with Ibm I, and we have more choices than ever. If you kind of look at the top, from a power hardware platform, we're trying to make sure that our customers have choices and infrastructure. So I'll talk more about that, in a couple slides of, is it public cloud, is it private cloud, is it traditional systems, where you deploy your Ibm I operating system. You have more choices today than you ever did before. Making sure that we continue from a power standpoint, be resilient, secure, scalable, give you lots of options, where you're looking to, modernize your application, no matter which operating system that you're running it on. And all of this runs on the Power processor. So we're kind of excited that, just recently we introduced the Power 10 processor and our first server with the Power 10 processor. So again, this is a great, testament to our heritage and our roadmap, but we're still selling Power 9. So I'll have a couple slides here to, kind of show, again, from hardware, from a power standpoint, where Ibm I fits and what your choices are. So kind of on the left, you can see Power Server Traditional. So if you're a customer that, you buy a system, you size it for peak, you buy it for 3 to 5 years, and unless, you run out of something or you want to expand your system, you run that system until you go out to the next generation. We still sell those systems. Like I said, we've been selling Power 8 systems since 2018, and now we're just starting to roll out. That was Power 9 systems from 2018, now going to Power 10 systems. We've been enhancing the models over time, doing kind of different things, different packaging. We introduced a new one-core offering last year for our very smallest customers that, we're using a system called the S812, kind of a small single socket system. So that was a new addition that we did last year. Otherwise, 2018 is when we introduced all of those. On the far right, we introduced in 2019 Power Virtual Server. So this is for our customers that are looking to get out of the data center or maybe to move certain workloads to a public cloud offering. That's been our offering, so a production, development test, DR, you have lots of options out there, and Ibm I along with AIX Linux is fully supported. And then kind of a new one in the middle there. So kind of started at the end of 2019, but really kind of came out last year in 2020, is what we're calling Power Private Cloud with Dynamic Capacity, or sometimes referred to as Pools 2.0. This is where if you want to have cloud-like consumption, but you'd like to do it on-prem, you can create a pool of 1 to multiple systems, and you could do some sharing of systems and resources, and you can have static or kind of capitalized expenses, and then you could have metering. So if you wanted to really kind of pay for the drink for all of your infrastructure, you could buy a system with a minimum of 1 core, and then everything, you would pay for on a metered basis. Or again, you could add more capitalized resources and then meter only for month end, year end, or some kind of spiky type workloads. So we have 3 different choices, kind of event structure today. On the left is kind of showing you some of the models. So lots of great choices for our customers. IBM also tends to throw the word hybrid cloud around a lot. So I guess I'd like to make sure that people are aware of what that means, at least from us. So I created this slide earlier this year for an IBM I customer base to try and maybe help them understand that, kind of like I just saw on the last screen, you have multiple choices where your infrastructure, and hybrid cloud implies that you can have some stuff on-prem, you could have some stuff in a public cloud, and you could mix and match. So if we kind of look at this graphic, maybe go on the kind of the bottom right, again, that traditional server, you're running IBM I today. Maybe you're looking to deploy something with OpenShift. You could put that in a partition right next to IBM I, or you could have OpenShift running in the public cloud connecting to your on-prem system. Or I'm using the private cloud technology. We're on pooling systems together, and I want to reach up into the public cloud and leverage a service. So IBM Cloud has over 2,200 services, from Watson chatbot services to infrastructure services like running IBM I. So kind of how could you stitch these together, or what's the art of the possible, I guess. So it's not, if you just want to run IBM I in one-to-end partitions on your system, you could do that. Or you're at IBM I 7.3 looking to move to IBM I 7.4. You'd like a dev environment. Well, maybe that would make sense, where you could spin it up in Power Virtual Server, do your testing, and then validate your process, and then when you're ready, deploy that on-prem with one of your servers. So lots of great choices, lots of great options for you, as a customer, is how you can do one or all 3 of these different infrastructure options. So here's just one picture showing the servers that we have today. So again, Power 9 came out in the 2018 timeframe. Still lots of customers, buying this. If you're running older Power 8, Power 7, Power 6, I see lots of servers out there. Power 9 is great performance. About 50% more performance than Power 8 systems. So we typically deliver more performance per core. If you look kind of in the bottom left there, the systems that start with an S, our scale-out systems tend to be our most popular, with our IBM I customers requiring 1 to how many cores. The S stands for scale out. Then we have the processor edition. So in this case, Power 9, and then how many sockets are in the system, and then how high is the system from a rack standpoint. So you can see the S914, Power 9, 1 socket, 4U high. The S924, of course, is 2 sockets, 4U high. So S922. So again, those number 4 are mostly our volume that our customers have been purchasing for IBM I. But then for our larger customers, our customers looking for the most scalable, robust system, that's our E980. That's up to 4 drawers, each with 4 sockets, so up to 192 cores. And then, as I mentioned, in 2020, we did some tweaks or adjustments to our product family, added this private cloud kind of capability, and we also did some I/O and storage enhancements to our system. So we're pretty much kind of done enhancing the Power 9 product family. We're still going to probably offer I/O, but we're starting to really make that transition now to the Power 10 based servers. So just one slide again on the metering, since this is kind of a new concept for many customers of, I can purchase a system with minimal level of activations, and then that's called the base. If you kind of look at that graphic in the lower left, you can see, I can have just one system, but you really get the benefit of sharing when you have multiple systems or multiple partitions on multiple systems. So if you could look at all of your systems at the exact same time on a minute basis, you probably have some opportunities where, instead of purchasing separate systems with lots of resources, maybe I could be more smart in my purchase of these systems, knowing that I could be sharing or offsetting resources. So you pick the base resources that you want to purchase on the system. So you minimum of one, but you on an 8-core system, let's say you buy 4. And then for those peaks or valleys that you have, you can then do metering. And think of metering kind of like the prepaid and full car analogy, where I have a phone, I buy a credit, and credit's $240, and then whenever I dip into metering, which is done by the minute, I start debiting that phone card, and then with a product called the CMC, the Cloud Management Console, it allows me to kind of see what my systems are doing. So if you look in kind of the gray boxes there on the right, you can see a little bit that we have lots of great visibility into the system on what are they doing, how are they being used. You can set alerts, so you can really kind of monitor. So really, Power Private Cloud, think of it as a financial model. If I'm going to use a resource 100%, you're better off buying it traditionally or as a base resource. If you really are, again, want to have more cloud-like economics, but on-prem, that's where this whole metering kicks in. And by you controlling the base to metering floor or resources, you can kind of dictate how much you're paying or how much you're differing into metering. And like I said, this has been out for a little while, and we've now added all of our operating systems there from a core standpoint, from an operating system standpoint. So lots of great flexibility. I'd be glad to have a further conversation with you on that. And then for our public cloud offering, which is called Power Systems Virtual Server, we have our kind of scale out enterprise class systems. You can start at a minimum of 1/4 of a core. This is measured by the hour, kind of billed by the month. So if you did have kind of workloads that needed more work, let's say a batch job at night, you can definitely get pure public cloud here. You can pay for the resources when you need them. Again, Ibm I, AIX, all the options. We've been expanding the data centers all across the world the last couple of years. So I think we're lots of great capabilities, filled in some gaps we had previously. We're going to announce this week a virtual tape library in Power Virtual Server for our customers that we would like to back up to tape drives. So this is a great offering. Again, it's fully production ready, but we see a lot of our Ibm I customers maybe starting with maybe putting a dev workload up there, or maybe doing like a dev test type thing, or maybe DR is where they're starting. But we also had, again, some customers have moved production up there too. So great options up there. Okay, so just a few slides on Power 10. Again, this is not a whole update, but so Power 10, the processor, this is our latest edition. We announced this last year, 2020, in the August timeframe at a conference called Hot Chips. So I guess if you have a processor technology and you want to show it off, you go to Hot Chips and you show people. So this is where IBM showed off kind of the new chip. Now this year in 2021, now we're finally delivering servers on that chip. So we've shrunk, made things smaller, run things faster. We've added some new capabilities, Gen 5 I/O. So this is twice as fast as Gen 4, which is twice as fast as Gen 3. So when you're moving up in technology, of course, we definitely want to have things go faster. We've done a lot from the energy standpoint, making things, even though we're making things smaller and making things more, dense on the chip, we're doing it at a better energy efficiency. So we're getting lots of people asking us, what's your carbon footprint? What's your sustainability message? This is a great story that by moving to our latest process technology, moving to our latest servers, you can do more with less, which has a really kind of good green and that type of aspect for people. We continue with reliability. We continue with the security by adding things like onboard memory encryption, and we're also trying to add some AI capabilities. What could we do with data that's on the processor in Ibm I, in AIX, and do it in the chip instead of having to take that data off to another system. So you're going to see a lot more on this kind of AI where the data resides versus taking it off the system. So here's our family roadmap. Again, not spend a lot of time here, but I think it's a good track record for IBM that we come out and on a regular clip level, we come up with new processor generations. So Power 8 came to Power 9, Power 9 came to Power 10. And while we're all excited about Power 10, the developers in Rochester, Minnesota, and Austin, Texas, they're already looking at the next generation, which you can probably figure out, the chip number. They're looking to see what that's going to be and where we're going to go in that future. So I think it's kind of a good testament to, we have a good, good clip level of when we do things. And we tend to not just put more cores on a chip or on a socket. We tend to get more performance per core. That's what our customers ask for. So when they're moving up the product family, they know that they're going to get a little better performance. So here's a picture of the chip. So there's not going to be a quiz later on what this means, but a lot of people like to kind of see the logical view of it. It's physically a 16-core chip, but we're productizing 15 cores. This is about the size of a quarter, or a large, postage stamp. If you've ever seen us hand out little pictures of what the Power 9 is, this is very similar to what the Power 9 looked like. So this is a processor with cores, or a chip with cores that will go into a socket. And we talk about 1 socket, 2 socket, 4 socket systems. Picture one of these going in there. And with Power 10, we have both single socket or SCM modules and dual chip or DCM. So in a socket, especially on their systems that are scale out, which are kind of going to be our future, we potentially will have a lot of cores, because we'll have 2 of these chips in one particular socket. So I don't want to go through all the details, but I just kind of show you, it's kind of nice to picture what a chip looks like. The left and right is where memory goes off. We have something new called OMI, Open Memory Interface, where we can attach traditional DRAM memory, but we're also looking at what does the future hold for memory. Is there some new cool thing that's going to come out in the future that we might want to attach to? And so by having this OMI interface, we're kind of future-proofing the system to allow us to go to different memory technologies that may make sense. And on the edge, that where it says Power Axion, this is for our larger systems like our E1080 we just announced. That chip can go from chip to chip, go to different sockets, and to go to different drawers of our system. And so the E1080, which is our latest system, is faster than our E980, which is faster than our other systems. So the announcement of our Power 10 systems, and specifically the E1080, which is our first system on the Power 10, was announced on September 8th. So we had a 45-minute webcast for customers, so you can follow this link. You'll get the slides later to follow this. You can just click on there, you can watch it, and our executives and some industry analysts kind of talking about Power Processor, talking about our latest system. So if you're looking for more information on what it is and kind of hear our story on why we think customers should be excited about Power 10, you can follow this link. And then from an Ibm I standpoint, we did a webcast with Common. Common is our kind of largest Ibm I users group. So we did with Steve Will, who's the Ibm I chief architect, myself, and Tim Rowe, who's kind of our application development focal point. We did a 1-hour presentation covering the latest things that we had in our technology refreshes. So Ibm I, we do twice yearly technology refreshes. So we gave an update on that, and I covered a little bit more, on the Power 10 family. So I don't think this is behind. I think this is available to anybody. You don't have to be a Common member, to attend this. So if you wanted to kind of get an hour update on the latest on Ibm I and Power, I'd recommend going out and watching this. Okay, just a few pictures on the Power 10 E1080. And while I mentioned that we have a lot of our customers buying the scale-out systems, which will come out later, I think some of the themes that we have with Power 10 will resonate or translate to other systems. So that's why I like to give you my take or give you my presentation on them. So I mentioned security. So we added encrypted memory to the system. You can't turn it off. You can't turn it on. It's always there. So it's a great new feature to have, for those times where customers are definitely in the security conscious world, looking for anything that we can do from a system standpoint, to make the systems more secure or securable. I mentioned the sustainability, since we're 50%, let's say, more performance per core on Power 10 than Power 9. We can do more work. And I also mentioned that high energy efficiency. So not only are we doing more work per core, we're taking less energy to do it. So our footprint gets smaller, the electricity demands, the amount of real estate that you have in your data center could hopefully go down by moving to latest and greatest technology. We've also done some things in the Power 10 processor and the Power 10 systems to make them more reliable. We've done some of our cabling and other things to really reduce points to failure to make sure that our systems stay up, especially with our E1080, which is our kind of flagship system. Put all these partitions, put all these things in the system. We want to make sure that they stay up. An industry analyst, there's a company out there called ITIC. They do a yearly kind of reliability review, and other than IBM mainframe, which typically is number 1, Power is right there with number 2. So we want to make sure that we're keeping that leadership position in our marketplace to make sure that our systems are reliable and staying up. And I talked a little bit about AI. Can we when people are looking at artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, are there some things that we can do in the processor? So Power 10 specifically had something called MMA, Matrix Math Assist. So are there some things we could be doing in the operating system, looking at the data or leveraging the data from an AI standpoint versus taking it out to another system and trying to plug it through a GPU? Can I do it, right where the data actually sits? So I think this is an evolving story. Once now that we have the chip and this technology, what can the operating systems do with that to give you more insight, again, where the data is at, in this case, an IBM I. So a picture of the E1080. So if you're familiar with our enterprise class systems, we haven't changed kind of the structure of it for the last couple generations. So Power 8 to Power 9 to Power 10. You can see that, it's a can be a pretty good sized system. In this case now with up to 15 cores and a socket, up to 4 sockets in a drawer, up to 4 drawers, you can go, quite a big system. Again, with the highest reliability, highest, network bandwidth between the system. And I've already mentioned some of the things like the encryption and the OMI interface. So hopefully if you're looking for, a big system, to run lots of workloads, our E1080 would be a great system for you to look at. In IBM I land, we use a workload called Commercial Processing Workload, or CPW, to measure our systems. So usually when we come up with new systems, that's one of the first questions I get asked is, hey, what's the performance? What's the CPW number of that new system compared to the older system? So I did some simple math to kind of show you if you're looking at the Power 9 system compared to the Power 10, and I'm looking at comparable proof points. So in this case, the 10 core and the 12 core, you can see the 10 core is about 50% more performance per core, and the 12 core is about 60% performance per core. The single chip modules we have in the 1080 is our most performing. So the scale out systems, when those come out, those probably won't have the same gigahertz speeds, might be a little bit slower, but still should offer impressive, let's say 40 to 50% performance per core compared to Power 9. So we're not anywhere near publishing any numbers yet or announcing those systems, but that's just my gut feel based on what I'm seeing here. So again, this is what we expect with our systems, is to deliver performance per core gains. And so if you're coming from Power 8 and going over Power 9 and going right to Power 10, you'll probably see at least 2x performance per core. So how is this enabled? So IBM I does technology refreshes at least twice a year. So you can kind of see the map. So when Power 9 came out, we had a couple of TRs for the releases in market at the time to give them the enablement that needed for Power 10. And so you can kind of see here that with our latest TRs that we had on September 8th, we enabled Power 10, and for the high-end system, just like we did, in the previous paths. So if you're at 7.3 or 7.4, and you're looking at Power 10 hardware, you can move to the latest TRs that we have for those particular operating system releases, and you'll get that support. This chart is also good to kind of from an IBM I roadmap, showing you that when we introduce new hardware, we tend to pick up the operating systems that are currently being enhanced and supported. So right now, 7.3 and 7.4 are the releases that we are currently marketing and selling and enhancing. So it should make sense that those releases are the ones that we have supported on the Power 10 hardware platform. You can also kind of see the cadence of IBM I. So some years we've had 2 years between a release, sometimes we had 3, sometimes we had 4, and we had the most positive feedback when we had about 3 years between releases. So if you kind of look at different charts that we have, you can probably do some rough, figuring out of when IBM I would announce a new release, probably on like a 3-year clip level. And we typically have 2 releases currently in development. So if you look at the chart and other charts that we show, the arrows are always going to the right. So IBM I is not ending. We don't have an end of support. We are still enhancing the product's releases with technology refreshes, and where appropriate, we are announcing new releases, just because sometimes you just can't do everything with a technology refresh. You actually need a new operating system release. So here's one chart that shows the TRs that we had back in September 8th, and I include a link at the bottom. This is a great website where you can go out there and you can see if you're at 7.3 and you want to go to 7.4, what's in the base release in 7.4 and what's at every single TR that's in a particular release. So I mentioned this TR had support for our latest Power 10 hardware, but it also had other things. You can see there that we're always enhancing the database, doing SQL services, doing HTTP, different services. RDI, our desktop tooling, was enhanced with the new release. So if you have the if you're on software maintenance, go out there and grab the latest release out there. And as Allison will talk later, we're continually doing stuff from an application development and tooling standpoint. We introduced a new Navigator product. So Navigator for I has been out there for a while, but we kind of refreshed the plumbing and the look and feel to make it more customized, along with access point solutions. So if you're looking for graphical products to work with your system, hopefully you're already aware of and using Navigator for I and access point solutions. And then for cloud, I mentioned the VTL is going to be a new virtual table library function that's coming out, along with cloud storage solutions, which is a product that helps our customers if you want to get data off your on-prem system into the cloud, or if you're already in cloud and you want to back up within cloud, the cloud storage solutions program might be something that you would want to look at further. So here's just one screenshot of Navigator. I think it's kind of an impressive, I think they said a reimagined interface. So it's very personal, personalizable, customizable, so you can have which columns you want to see. And this is just, the first release of this new interface. And so you can imagine over time, we're going to make it, even better than it is right today. One of the functions that I appreciated when I was looking at the Navigator is, let's say you're looking at work active jobs on one system. At the very bottom, you can click on a list of all your partitions or all your systems. And when you click on them, it automatically takes you to that perspective on the next system. So if you wanted to go look at work active jobs or print output or subsystems, you can just quickly kind of tab on the different systems and it'll take you to the different systems. So that's just one example, I think, of a very powerful interface that you can use to work the system. There's no charge for this. The PTFs came out at the end of September. So there's a document out there that has all the details on what you need to get for this particular function. Here's a chart that I like to show people of, okay, what hardware can run particular operating system releases. So the latest Power 10 that we just announced and will be announcing will be 7.3 and 7.4 only. And then of course you can see, Power 9. We didn't hear last year, we added Power 9 support with Ibm I 7.1, kind of an accommodation to get some of our customers to latest technology, but really would love people to be at 7.3 or 7.4 because that's where we IBM are making all of our enhancements in those particular products. So 7.3 and 7.4 is kind of the best for the future. I also like to make sure that whenever we announce new hardware, I get questions about ISVs or solution providers. So most of our solution providers do certify to an operating system release, not hardware. Some ISVs like to test on hardware, but if you're at 7.3 and 7.4 and you have a solution, you probably, when you decide to move to Power 10, it should just work out fine. The only thing that we just need to make sure is that Power 10 servers are going to have a different serial number. So if you have software that is licensed or on a metric based on the hardware technology, you just have to make sure that if that hardware is coming in with a new server serial number or a new processor feature, that may impact licensing. But other than that, operating system release, if you're at 7.3 or 7.4, you should be okay. And I also like to make sure that whenever we have a new hardware generation, that we have a process for IBM I to transfer it between systems. So your enterprise class system, let's say you're an E980, you can transfer that IBM I operating system license to E1080. Or if you're a scale out Power 8 and you want to go to scale out Power 9, you can transfer IBM I. So this is something we've had for many years that gives you that capability to kind of preserve some of your investment and for a little charge, move that between systems within the enterprise. So that's what I wanted to cover. So this is kind of my last little slide of feel free to go out and look at the Power website. We have lots of great resources. If you want more details on anything, this is kind of a fire hose drill of technology. I'd be glad to give you more information. And with that, while Alison changes to her slides, I'll quickly look in the chat, see if there's anything I can answer.
Okie doke.
Looking through here. So one person commenting, looked at the Navigator. Okay, metering. So metering is by cores, and again by minutes. So yeah, you would have to, if ISVs are licensed by core, you'd have to make sure. What nice thing is about the metering and anything that we have with the private pools follows partitioning rules. So if you have a partition that's hard capped at 2 cores, giving you that metering capability isn't going to break anything, or is it going to extend the rules? It just, if you had 1 core base and 1 core of metering, and that partition then totals 2, you still have to license your ISV solutions to 2 cores, but how you get those 2 cores is what's different now, or what can change.
Cool.
All right, and then there was this last one about the metering the cloud for developers. So if you're in the cloud, then yes, the product is licensed by user in the cloud, and we can have a further conversation with that. Okay.
And if you were using your desktop tooling, you could go to a cloud environment and just pay for the resources you would need for Ibm I and for the development tools. So you can meter that by how much you're using at any time. So we do have that capability, not on your on-prem box today, not that level of granularity, but if you move to a cloud environment like IBM's Power Virtual Server, you definitely can get metered or charged by your usage. So as an individual developer, you're not paying for an entire box, you're just paying for the slice that you're using. Okay. So thank you, Dan, appreciate that. And we're going to talk for the next little bit about Ibm I specifically. So I always get asked how our business is doing. It's an interesting question. It's always the same question. It's always asked, are you growing? So let me tell you a little bit about our business. We do business in 117 countries around the world. We have customers from all sizes. We have customers that are tiny little companies that have 5 or less employees, right up to, I would say, a lot, maybe over half of the Fortune 500 use Ibm I somewhere in their business. And that's important to know. Some of the largest banks in the world, while they might run their core banking on a larger mainframe, many of them run their retail banking or distributed banking on Ibm I. And that's true. We have such a variety of industries as well as sizes of clients. And when I say a variety of industries, our history is always in manufacturing and distribution. If you remember back to the days when we announced the AS400, and for those of you who are young, if you go and do some research, you will see in 1988, IBM provided applications that ran on the AS400 when it was announced. So we had MAPIX and DMAS and CMAS and RMAS. And so applications that really fit the manufacturing and distribution sector. But over the last, I'm going to say as broad as 10 years, where we have seen incredible growth is in the financial sector. Lots and lots of banks, insurance companies, other financial institutions, along with huge growth in retail. We have seen just tremendous growth in very critical distributed retail solutions. So I would just, we have such a variety of industries, such a variety of sizes of clients, such a variety of languages and cultures that where Ibm I runs. But then, of course, we had the last couple of years, and things have changed dramatically for everybody in the last couple of years. I would say that when the pandemic hit and we all were sent home to work, what was absolutely reassuring to all of the Ibm I people inside IBM was we knew that Ibm I would move, and their customers and employees, all those shops would move easily to work remotely. We had so many capabilities built into the system, including in the development environment, of course, with Rational Developer for I. You could do your development work on a desktop and periodically upload it to the server. So we knew we would work very well when we moved remotely. As far as the business goes, the entire world took a bit of a hit last year. In second quarter, we didn't do so well, but then we topped that with 4 consecutive quarters of growth. Haven't seen the final numbers yet for third quarter of this year, but starting in third quarter next year, we grew year to year 4 consecutive quarters in a row. So that's a great story. It's absolutely true when we measure it by revenue. And so we saw an increase in revenue. And I just thought I'd share that little with you. Steve, Will, Dan, and I write this as a joint exercise, our Ibm I Strategic Directions. And I've talked to the group before, so I know we've covered this, but I did want to highlight just a couple of things. We have focused on the same 3 main points probably for the last 10 years. But what changes is underneath those points. The focus for us has always been around power solutions. I mentioned ISV applications, but on top of that, we have the applications that exploit the latest power technology that Dan talked about. We want to make sure that customer solutions that are being built by you, by RPG programmers, by our solution providers, all of them are able to use some of the latest in technology. And then openness. You know, when we first introduced Ibm I, it was known very, very, very well broadly as being proprietary and closed. And over the last, I'm going to say 15 years, we have worked hard at opening up Ibm I. We have over, and I'll talk a bit more about it, we have over 350 application packages, enablement technologies, databases, languages, tools, environments for open source applications. And this has really helped us in pulling new people into the Ibm I community. Young kids who study Python and Perl and PHP, Node.js at school, they're able to come into an Ibm I environment and immediately be productive. And we're going to continue to do that, and we're going to do it in an integrated fashion. These are the key tenets of our strategy, and we continue to evolve the bullets below, but we stay true to those three main tenets. Dan mentioned our support roadmap, but this is really the roadmap I wanted to talk about very quickly. We're currently sitting at Ibm I 7.4. It was introduced in 2019. Prior to that, we had 7.3 in 2016, and prior to that, we had 7.2 in 2014. I know I've spoken to all of you about this before, but 2014 to 2016, the feedback we got from ISVs and customers was 2 years is too short. You can't do that. You can't continue to have us actually evolve and get everything updated and so on, especially some of our clients that have hundreds of different locations and hundreds of boxes. They can't get one up. They can't get everything updated before our next release comes out. So they're behind before they even start. Prior to 2014, it had been 2010 when we introduced 7.1, and the feedback we got was, 4 years from 2010 to 2014 is way too long. You can't go 4 years between releases. So let's just figure this out. 24 years is too long. 2 years is too short. So as you can see, we made a decision between 2016 and 2019 that we would deliver a new release in 3 years. Well, following along with that same paradigm, you can probably figure out when our next release will be coming. Our development team, quite honestly, is heads down on finishing up that release, and we're already architecting and have started building the key pieces of the following one. And we're looking at what will come beyond that. I just want to make that point because that, in conjunction with the support roadmap that Dan showed you, will easily tell you that we have support for Ibm I way past 2030. That's obvious from our strategy white paper, which we just updated at the beginning of this year. There's a link in the deck. You can go and have a look at that strategy white paper and download it. Or if you just go to the Ibm I homepage, which I'm sure you all have bookmarked, you'll be able to go and pull that strategy document down. As I said, we have Ibm I Strategy is made up of a lot of open source, and we have a ton of it available. Everything from languages, open source, tools, and framework. And that enhances the environment that we have been working with for a long time, things like RPG and COBOL. But it's not the RPG and COBOL that ran in 1988. This is free format. This is the new instruction set. And we're using tools like Rational Developer for I, the latest version of tools. This is important to know because we are not enhancing or we're not removing support. We're just not enhancing any of that old technology. We let it run, but it continues to be enhancements only on the most current releases. When it comes to development, we have one goal, 2 sentences. We allow you to code what needs to be coded and integrate whatever needs to be integrated. And we're constantly looking at how to enhance that environment and how to make it more robust. This is what I would call my modern application structure. And you can see on the right-hand side, you can see all of the modular pieces of traditional code. This isn't the 5 to 10,000 line RPG top-down, what do we used to call them, multi-function structured programs any longer. This is highly modular code. Each module contains a unique or very distinct set of characteristics. Perhaps it's doing data access, perhaps it's putting an image out. Whatever it's doing, it's a very a small subset. Perhaps it's doing a single calculation. And by putting it into these small modules, it allows me to assemble an application very quickly or to pull in other components. So for example, if you were moving from a green screen interface into the world of a graphical interface, like on the left-hand side of my chart, you might choose to do that by open source. And so I've got open source components that we can tie in. On top of that, we can reach out to the IBM cloud or to the cloud in general, or perhaps even to a partition that's running side by side. So what does that all mean when I talk about that? It sounds really great. Let's start at the basics. IBM is committed to the RPG language. We continue to add enhancements. In fact, we add lots of enhancements at every release. Some of these are enabled and delivered at the release boundary. Some are delivered through the technology refreshes that Dan was talking about and showed you on our support chart. It's really important to know that this language continues to evolve and we continue to make it work with other things that are coming out in the industry. If you want details on all of these different options, I put the link in here to the RPG Cafe and you can go and have a look. But going back to, if I can go backwards, maybe not. There we go. Going back to the letter, I thought I'd mention this. It was renewed this year. We had a lot of questions about the longevity of RPG. And so one of our senior vice presidents, Steve Sibley, authored a letter to our Ibm I community talking about the fact that we continue to enhance RPG. And the best way for all of you to participate in those enhancements is to put in request for enhancement, RFEs, into the process. We use those as we are developing the language to understand how you use the language and how we can help you. So I would encourage you to do that if you see enhancements to RPG that are necessary. So let's think about our modern RPG code that's modular and free format. How do I actually make it work with open source? So I've got a number of the typical languages that you might use here. How we have connections and we continue to enhance those connections. We have a number of different ways that those two pieces of code can talk together, and we continue to look for more. We also can do the same thing if you decide to put your open source options, your user interface, into a cloud environment. So we have many customers who are running RPG application code on their machine, but they have outsourced their data center partially by putting the open source environment up in the cloud. In either way, all of these connections work the same way. It's the configuration under the covers of where this resides that's key. We have many, many examples of customers that are converging open source with IBM I. I put a few of them on here. Some of them you may know about, but let me tell you a little bit about how the use case looks. In the top right-hand corner, this is a company in Japan called BrainStaff, and BrainStaff actually works with colleges and universities. They run their entire university on IBM I. But what they weren't able to do with traditional code is to be able to reach to students' mobile devices. And as we all know, teenagers live on their mobile devices. I'm going to use phone, but I also am including tablets and all kinds of different laptops and so on. But let's just talk about the fact that they live on their phone for a moment. How do these students get the latest information about when their classes are being held and whether a professor has some office time? What about a tutor? What about a proctor for an exam? They need to converse with them to find out how to get into the exam room. All of that has been front-ended by mobile devices, and they've put open source using Node.js. They have put a whole front end onto that application. Another one I love to talk about is this bottom left-hand corner. This is Jory. Jory is a manufacturer of high-end furniture in Belgium. And Jory actually opened up their RPG application and started interacting with a web-based interface. And they used Java on the front end. And what they did was they actually created a website where you or I, if we were ordering furniture, could go to their website and we get to select what the furniture might look like. You can pick a style of a chair, a head pillow, the armrest, the kind of feet on the chair, and you can build it yourself. I mean, that's a standard application. And so they built that. And then customers were saying, you know I built it, but it really didn't give me a good picture of what that chair would look like when it came to my home. And so now that it's in my environment, I really don't like it. And they were sending things back. So Jory actually spent some time building a 3D configurator. And they built that using open source and some gaming languages that just happened to run on Ibm I in the PACE environment. And they built a 360-degree configurator. So now you go and choose your chair and choose your armrests and choose the legs on the chair. And then when you're done, you can actually flip this 360 degrees. So you can see the bottom, the side, the front, the back, all angles of the chair. And they saw a huge number of orders being accepted. Somebody ordering might have seen the picture and changed their mind a bit, adjusted it, been able to spin the chair around at all different angles again, and then they get a picture of it, what it's going to look like in their home. These are just a couple of examples of incredible innovation from customers about integrating traditional applications that are running their business and extending the value by doing things through open source. Now, another way you might want to extend that application is through connecting with something like the Internet of Things. You know, I always, when we talk to customers, even today, we talk about creating graphical interfaces. And one of the standard things I always hear is, well, that's a great idea, but it won't work, and fill in the blank. Things like, it doesn't work for data entry. And my answer is, there are better ways to capture data than doing subject to human error in keying in information from paper and having somebody key it into the system. There are easier ways to capture that data today. So what are some of those things? Some of those things might be the outbound flow of data. This is one of my favorites. I got to go to this company in Denmark where they actually have automated their entire warehouse. Now they run a standard distribution application running on Ibm I, and that distribution application actually sends the order picking information to the robotics server that sits in the warehouse. And that robotics server processes the orders and sends the information to these robots. And they have a combination of these very large robots that run up and down the aisles of their warehouse. And then they also have smaller robots that actually pick goods out of a box. Now, it just so happens A&O Bodrine in Denmark is a plumbing parts distributor. And when they get the order, these large robots race up and down the aisles, collecting the pallets or the boxes off the pallets. They bring them to a standard distribution site, and the smaller robots open the box and take out the parts. They build the order. What A&O Bodrine will tell you is that they are able to deliver 100% plus 65 more, 165% of the same of orders are delivered in an hour based on what they were doing from before. This is pretty significant. And they say it's because robots don't get sick. They don't need a coffee break. They don't go out for lunch. and they can work 24/7 through the night. And it's allowed A&O Beaudrain to actually cut down on their warehouse staff as well and redeploy those people to do other things. So outstreaming of data, working with the Internet of Things. Or how about this? This one was one of my favorites again. I don't know if all of you have Alexa in your home. I do, and it's really, I love it. You come home at night, you say, Alexa, I'm home, and Alexa turns on some lights. This is great. However, you can also use Alexa business applications, and Amazon has this that you can actually work with to develop business skills. And so SAIB in Italy used Alexa in their sales department. All of that information that sellers might need is in catalogs and databases in their DB2 database. And what they discovered was the sellers were constantly doing all kinds of searches and so on, or looking at printed output, and they were trying to figure out how to speed up that timing. Time it took. And one of the things they discovered was they created these skills with this device. And now you just speak to the device and it would go into the DB2 database and retrieve the information that you needed. This is pretty cool. I mean, this is a really interesting application of a modern interface. Now, Dan was talking about hybrid cloud options for an Ibm I customer. The key to know about with hybrid cloud is it's exactly the same Ibm I. Whether you're running like at the bottom with the standalone server, whether you're running in a private cloud environment where we're letting you run a cloud on-prem in cloud-like mode and charging you just for the usage of what you need, or whether you're running completely off-prem with all or part of your application and you're running in a cloud, it's exactly the same Ibm I. We don't have a subset. We don't have a light version. It's I. You get the database, the security, all the pieces that you know and love. But what's interesting is, as I'm running Ibm I on a power box, and Dan showed you a couple of examples, you're also able to run some of these other things like Ansible or OpenShift. Ansible requires a Linux partition, but it helps you in things like DevOps. So as I create application components and I need to distribute them, Ansible running on a Linux partition right beside Ibm I on the same hardware box can actually really assist in distributing those fixes. OpenShift is our containerized version. It's an environment on itself. And if you are looking at running containered applications, or pieces of an application might be running in a container today, then OpenShift also can be installed in a partition running right beside Ibm I. It's really flexible because it allows us to take the Ibm I application that runs your business and really expand or enhance the value of that application. Now, how we might do that is today on the left-hand side of my screen, we have what we're calling our Indigenous Applications, ones that are running today on Ibm I. And again, it could be a blend of both open source and traditional languages running in a VM-based environment on IBM Power. But now I need to be able to get some of the additional value from components that could be running in OpenShift as a container, or perhaps I'm using Ansible to distribute fixes. Existing applications today can call services that will actually cause these other components to execute. Ibm I applications can also provide the services. If I have a containerized application executing, I can make a call, REST-based services will work fine, into our Ibm I application, and we deliver some services there. Now, it's really interesting as we move down this path, one of the things that we're talking about very clearly is this is not a decision about Ibm I or the cloud. It's not Ibm I or DevOps. It's not Ibm I or containers. It's Ibm I and DevOps, Ibm I and cloud, Ibm I and DevOps, Ibm I and containers. It's really an interesting concept that we have this ability to blend everything together. And definitely one of those things that allows us to do that is the fact that we can spin up a partition right beside our IBM I partition that's running our business application. And we get to take advantage of all of those additional things. Ooh, hang on, there we go. So we're talking about a modern application. As I said, the modern application structure has modular code that exists today, RPG or COBOL. We've got some front end or some processing that's written in open source. We have the technology through all the connectors to be able to talk to the IBM cloud. We can go to the cloud from other places, or we can talk to a partition that's running Linux or OpenShift and running other components of the application that we might need to have in a container. As I said, incredibly flexible and allows us to have great impact to the business overall. So kind of as a summarizing set of charts, what I like to talk about is we have various options. So I've got my power box at the bottom, and today we're probably running IBM I with DB2, with RPG, COBOL, maybe a little Java thrown in, and we have a business application that sits on top of it. Now we have thousands and thousands of business applications, and I only had one small space on my chart. But this might be a different application that you're running, or perhaps one that you've created yourself. And given the user group that we're talking with here, you might probably have written your own or extensions to some of these. So this is how you're running, and everything is great, but you have the ability, as you're trying to solve some business problems, into branching into the world of open source. Again, we've given a lot of different vehicles for connecting into applications or application components that you've written or that you're using that could be running Python, Node.js, perhaps residing in a Git repository, again, Java, maybe using MySQL or Maria database. Either one of those will also work in conjunction with DB2, and you're running in our PACE environment on the same power box. All of this, of course, within IBM I. But if you need to solve even more business problems, you might actually branch out to IBM Watson. I know when I was talking to the group previously, one of the things we spent some time on was how do we work with Watson? Watson has some incredible capabilities. Watson has the ability to go and interrogate volumes of data, for instance, social media data. So how are, if I'm running a restaurant, what are the reports of the food like? And you can get different comments that come in, and Watson helps you in analyzing that. Watson can do language translation for you. Watson can do data analytics. You upload data to IBM Watson, and it will look for comparisons for relationships that you might not expect. It will go through and find unanticipated relationships. You remember that old story about the gentleman who goes into a store and they discovered that they sell more beer on Sunday afternoons if they put if they put beer beside the diapers, because quite often people go into last minute shop on a Sunday afternoon to acquire diapers. And if you stick beer right beside it, lots of gentlemen who were in the store, and it happened, the analysis said it was more often men, would pick up a case of beer right because they had already come in to pick up diapers. Great way of doing unexpected analytics. As I mentioned, you could be spinning up a partition of Linux beside IBM I, and you could be running things like Ansible. Ansible is a great distribution mechanism for doing things like distributing to remote sites, updates, using it for DevOps, for instance. But there's other applications that could be running there as well, perhaps Cognos to do predictive data analytics, or information builders to do something similar in terms of doing analytics of the data that you have. And again, running on a Linux partition on the same power hardware. Or perhaps I'm actually going to run something and I'm going to do it in an in a OpenShift kind of environment. OpenShift allows me to actually run some of those containers. We like to think of them perhaps like a Docker application, some of the IBM cloud packs. These are all solutions that run inside OpenShift and again, on the same physical hardware. These are things that allow us to exploit the value of what we've already built in these native applications and using some of those connection mechanisms, REST, ODBC, JDBC, SQL calls, all of these can invoke pieces of the application that are running on these environments. Now, it just so happens that in many cases, what we're actually doing is putting all or part of those application components up in a cloud. That works too. As I said, it's the same IBM I, it's the same open source on I, it's the same Linux on Power, it's the same OpenShift. Doesn't matter whether you're doing it on-prem or whether you're doing it in the cloud, it's the same environment. This is a pretty powerful statement because it's very flexible then as to what you need to do, what you can use it for. And lastly, I'm just going to say so much innovation, so many of our clients doing that. On the previous chart where I showed the 4, there was a link to go out to our IBM I client stories site and actually go and see what some of those clients are doing. We have over 80 clients that have written their stories and talk about some of the things they're using with Power and IBM I, how they're exploiting the technology and growing and impacting their business. If you need some inspiration, if you're looking for a way to really start thinking about how to implement the technologies from a slightly different viewpoint, I encourage you to go and read some of these stories. They are inspiring on what they can do. So that's the end of the presentation I have. And hopefully that's covered a lot of what you've been asking for. I see there's one question out here about C# and .NET. You know, it's interesting. We have an interesting dance that we do with some of these technologies that are not IBM or open source. We do look continually to see about when we could possibly open source some of these technologies. For example, .NET, there is an open source version called Mono. It just wasn't able to be robust enough that we wanted to put that on our platform. But, you know, .NET comes from Microsoft, and it would be a partnership between the two companies. I'm not saying that's not possible. I'm saying it helps when both companies want to partner. So we've approached them numerous times about working with us about .NET. So far, they don't want to be our dance partner. I think that's the best way to put it. Any other questions for Dan or for myself? Okay, then I'm going to say thank you very much again for inviting us to participate. We really appreciate that you have that you ask for our input, that you want to hear what we have to say and what's new and happening with IBM I. Thank you for being our clients. I think most of you are. If you're running sign-on, you're probably running on IBM I. So we appreciate your business, appreciate your attention, and thank you very much. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to the team. I'm not sure which one of you is taking over, but thank you very much for that.